Everyone is talking about the dragons in episode 3. But I think they're looking at the wrong thing. Because the biggest turning point in this episode doesn't happen in the sky. It happens in a room full of ordinary people. Welcome to Ghost Frame. Let's look closer. For almost 3 seasons, House of the Dragon has told its story through kings, queens, lords, and dragons. Power has always lived inside castles, inside council chambers, inside the people fighting for the Iron Throne. But episode 3 quietly changes that. For the first time, the camera leaves the rulers and stays with the people forced to live through their decisions. Watch what happens when Rhaenyra enters the city. Nobody greets her as a future queen. Nobody speaks about succession. Nobody even mentions dragons. Instead, they talk about empty markets, dead livestock, missing food, children going hungry. At first, those conversations feel almost too small for a story like House of the Dragon. But that's exactly why they matter. Because wars are rarely remembered by the people who planned them. They're remembered by the people who survived them. Then the episode gives us one line that changes everything. A woman tells Rhaenyra, "The blockade isn't the only reason we're starving. The nobles are hiding food." Think about that for a second. The accusation isn't aimed at the enemy. It's aimed at the people who are supposed to protect the realm. And that's the moment episode 3 quietly changes. This is no longer just a story about who deserves the Iron Throne. It's becoming a story about whether power can still earn the trust of the people living beneath it. Once you notice that, the entire episode starts to feel different. If episode 3 has a single turning point, it's not a battle. It's not a dragon. It's this moment. When Sylvie tells Rhaenyra, "The blockade isn't the only reason people are starving." At first, that sounds like another complaint. But listen carefully to what she's really saying. She's accusing the nobles, not the enemy. The rich still eat. The poor still starve. That's a completely different kind of war. Until this moment, Rhaenyra has been fighting for a throne. Now she's forced to confront something much bigger. Whether the people she's trying to rule actually believe she's different. Watch Rhaenyra's reaction. She never interrupts. She never argues. She never tries to defend the decisions of her council. That's unusual. Kings in Westeros almost always answer criticism with authority. Rhaenyra answers it with silence. And that silence tells us more than any speech could. Because for the first time, she isn't listening as a claimant. She's listening as a queen. That doesn't mean she suddenly knows how to fix the problem. She doesn't. But episode 3 isn't showing us a solution. It's showing us awareness. This is the first moment where Rhaenyra truly understands that dragons cannot solve hunger. Fire cannot restore trust. And winning the throne won't matter if the people lose faith long before the war is over. That's why I think this scene quietly changes the entire season. Not because Rhaenyra makes a decision. Because from this point forward, every decision she makes will carry the voices of these people with her. Whether she realizes it or not. Right after Rhaenyra hears the voices of the small folk, episode 3 quietly shifts to another conversation. At first, it doesn't seem connected. But it absolutely is. Because while Rhaenyra is confronting the cost of ruling, Corlys is confronting the end of his legacy. Watch this scene carefully. For years, Corlys Velaryon refused to publicly acknowledge Alan and Adam. Not because he didn't know the truth. Because admitting the truth carried a political cost. But in episode 3, that calculation changes. When Corlys finally speaks openly about them, he isn't trying to protect his reputation anymore. He's trying to protect what survives after he's gone. Listen to the words he chooses. He doesn't talk about victory. He doesn't talk about the throne. He talks about his name, his blood, his future. That's a completely different priority. And that's what makes this scene so important. The war hasn't become less dangerous. But for Corlys, time has become even more dangerous than the war itself. Because battles can still be won. Time cannot. Episode 3 quietly reminds us that every major character is now fighting a different war. Rhaenyra is fighting for legitimacy. The small folk are fighting to survive. And Corlys is fighting against being forgotten. That's not a military conflict. It's a human one. And that's exactly why this scene matters. By now, Episode 3 has shown us 3 completely different stories. A queen, a lord, and ordinary people. At first, they don't seem connected. But watch what happens when you place them side by side. Rhaenyra discovers that ruling is far more complicated than winning a throne. Corlys realizes that victory means very little if no one remembers your name. And the small folk? They don't care who sits on the Iron Throne. They just want tomorrow to be better than today. 3 completely different people. 3 completely different goals. Yet every one of them is asking the exact same question. What will be left when all of this is over? That's the hidden structure of Episode 3. Not dragons. Not politics. Consequences. Notice how none of these scenes actually resolve anything. Rhaenyra leaves with more questions than answers. Corlys cannot undo decades of silence. The people return to empty homes. Nothing is fixed. And that's deliberate. Because Episode 3 isn't interested in solving problems. It's interested in showing how those problems begin. That's why this episode feels strangely quiet. The writers aren't building toward a battle. They're building toward inevitability. Every conversation, every compromise, every silence moves every character one step closer to a future they can no longer avoid. And that's the real warning hidden inside Episode 3. By the time the dragons finally change the war, the people have already been changed by it. When Episode 3 ended, I realized something. I had spent almost an hour thinking about dragons, politics, and succession. But the episode itself wanted me to think about something else. People. Because that's what every major scene quietly returns to. Not victory. Not strategy. People. A queen trying to understand those she wants to rule. A father wondering what will survive after he's gone. Families wondering if they'll survive another week. 3 completely different stories. 1 unavoidable truth. The dance of the dragons isn't destroying Westeros. It's revealing who people really become when everything around them starts falling apart. That's why Episode 3 feels so different. Nothing truly explodes. No kingdom falls. No battle changes history. And yet, almost every important character leaves this episode carrying something they didn't have before. A little more doubt. A little more fear. A little less certainty. George R.R. Martin has always written history this way. Wars don't suddenly create monsters. They slowly convince ordinary people to become them. And episode May 3rd be the clearest reminder of that idea we've seen so far. So maybe the biggest question isn't who will win the Iron Throne? Maybe it's this. When the war finally ends, how many of these people will still recognize themselves? Because after Episode 3, I'm not sure victory is the same thing as survival. The frame never lies. But sometimes, it quietly tells us the ending. Long before the story gets there. See you in the next frame.